Bonsoir, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a beautiful night out, and you're giving that up to sit in here with me, so thank you very much. Now, this is the first time I've been outside of Montreal. I've been to Montreal many times, and I had a chance to go to Quebec City and then take the train back down last night, and I'm very fortunate to be able to travel most places in the world, and I have yet to see a more beautiful countryside than you have right here. I'm tempted to move here. Dingwall as a company has been around a long time, 35 years already, and but I started much earlier than that. How many people are rich here? Are wealthy? Oh, rich. I don't see any hands. I'm not either, and I didn't start out that way. And so I got my start because I couldn't afford a Floyd Rose bridge for my guitar. So I decided to make one out of using files and drills and things like that. And so I made my own locking bridge, and that's what got me started in building guitars. So it started with bridges, and to this day, the bridge on this D-Rock here we make in-house. The bridges on the Z series, the high-end models that we make those in-house. We're very passionate about every detail on the guitar, and we're as nerdy as it gets, but that's how we like it, and I think that gives us a better instrument in the long run. And so if you're a nerdy person about bass, then we'll get along just great. Now, the company has been around for 35 years, but we didn't start with basses. Like I said, we started with a bridge, and it was terrible, but it worked well. And then the big plan was to make guitar necks, replacement guitar necks for Stratocasters. And my thinking was, well, there's 1 million Stratocasters out there. There's probably a pretty good market for necks. And there was a decent market, but as soon as I started selling necks, people wanted bodies. So I created bodies. And as soon as I did that, they wanted me to assemble, so I assembled them. And as soon as I did that, I got calls from bass players. And that's when I put the brakes on, because I don't come from the bass world. I come from drums and guitar and piano. And everybody wanted the same thing. They wanted a 5-string bass with a really good B string. And because I didn't know anything about basses, I'm going, well, I'm going to have to look where I do know something about. And so the first place I looked was, have you ever listened to the B string on a piano? It sounds amazing. And I remember as a little kid going up to my parents' piano. I was too short, too small still to be able to see the keys, but I would hit the low keys. And I just remember thinking, wow, I like that sound much better than I like the sound at the other end. And so I guess even though I don't come from the bass world, I've been a bass lover for my entire life. So what is it that pianos are doing that at the time bass guitars weren't? And as it turns out, pianos were one of the original multi-scale instruments. They have a different scale length for each note, and that allows the piano to have a balanced tone all the way across the keyboard. And it allows it to cover a huge range of music, from the very low to the very high. And that dates back. How long do you think that goes back to? Yeah. And before that, it was harps, and harps go all the way back. We don't know how far back they go, but there are hieroglyphics in Egyptian tombs that show multi-scale harps, 3000 BC. So even though this is something that hasn't been around too long on guitars, it's a concept that has worked in music for thousands and thousands of years. And so now it's just kind of this blending of one family, the guitar, violins, with another family, the harps and pianos, and you get a multi-scale bass. So I didn't invent multi-scale or fan frets. That was Ralph Novak, and before him, centuries ago, there was an English instrument called an Orfarian, and I believe there is one around the turn of the century too, but I can't find too much data on that. But it has come in and out of fashion, and I think this time, based on our history and where I see music going, I think it'll be around for good now. As long as there's electric music played on guitars, I think multi-scale will be something that is an option for many, many years to come. But 30 years ago, there were no multi-scale basses. So where do you start? There's nothing to learn from. And you know, when you write music, the first song you write sounds like all the music you've been listening to. And so the first bass I designed kind of had elements of Fenders in it. I've always been more of a Fender fan than a Gibson fan, so bolt-on neck, single truss rod. And the very first place I looked was the case. So a bass has to have a case, and I didn't want to get into the case business. I'll leave that to somebody else. I'll leave that to Levy's, or I'll leave it to TKL or somebody like that. I didn't want to make custom cases, so I started my bass design with a tape measure and a bass case. How wide does it need to be? How long does it need to be? And to this day, that 6-string bass there, even though the B string is 3 inches longer than a standard 4-string, the bass itself is actually slightly shorter and slightly narrower than a standard 4-string bass, so that it can fit in that case. And so part of how I was able to do that is, if you look at the headstock's as compact as you'd possibly want to get, and then the B string saddle is rammed right against the back end of the body. So that was a very intentional choice to try and just squeeze as much scale length into as little area as possible. And it also helped in a few areas in terms of balance. That's one of our core values, is the instrument, if you take your hands off of it, it should stay put. There's nothing worse than, you know, being stressed out, you're playing in front of 2,000 people and you have to adjust something and you forget and you do this and your instrument does that and falls off. So that is something that we pay very much attention to. And I'll just skip ahead a little bit to the D-Rock. But what we did in this case was we moved the strap pins as far to the neck as possible. And so even with this bass, which looks like there's no possible way it could balance on a strap, it does. This is one of our best balancing instruments that we've come up with so far. Another interesting thing about the D-Rock is, because the strap pins have been moved that way, it moves the bass this way. And you'll notice as you're playing it, I'm going to set it down so I don't drop it. You'll notice when you're playing, your arms aren't like this, they're balanced. And so it's a very comfortable, if you have shoulder issues, if you're an older guy like me, you got to pay attention to stuff like that. Young guys like you don't have to worry yet, but eventually, sometime you will. So the more balanced you can be, and the better your body's going to feel, and the more comfortable you'll play. And comfort is something that's important. I'll get into that in a little bit. But so anyways, back to the basses. So as far as I know, we were the first bass with a 37-inch B string. And how we came up with that was not through math. And fortunately, I didn't try and use math to try and figure that out, because I would have just messed it up. I just took a standard 4-string and found a B string. I don't even know what brand it was, but found a B string and put it where the G string normally is. And then I was able to have a slidable nut that I could move up and down the headstock to test out, what does 35 inches sound like? What does 36 sound like? And believe it or not, I couldn't really hear much of a difference between 35 and 34. I couldn't hear much of a difference. I heard a little bit of an improvement from 35 to 36, but when I started to get to 36 and a half, then things started to really fall into place. And when I got to 37, in comparing the B string, which was down here, and the E string, which was in its normal position, I got identical tone. And I went, okay, we found the perfect scale length to equal the E string. And so designed an entire bass around that, and then went to go buy strings. And because I didn't know what brand that was, I couldn't find strings long enough. So designed one bass, and then ended up in the string business because we had to get custom strings made. Fortunately, after calling every single string manufacturer in North America, I found one. It was Command Musical String. They were the parent company of Ovation. And they made helicopter blades, and they made all kinds of high-tech stuff, and they also made strings. And fortunately, the person who picked up the phone was a bass player. And when I told him what I was doing, he went, "Oh, that's interesting." He says, "You know what? I'm going to talk to our production manager. He's also a bass player." And when he told him what we were doing, he goes, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." And the thing about strings is this is an ancient industry. People have been making strings. D'Addario has been making strings for 400 years, a family business that's lasted 400 years. And believe it or not, how many strings do you think D'Addario makes a day? 700,000 per day. 700,000 strings per day. Amazing. I had a chance to tour their facility, and it's like a big family. Like, it's a really well-run company. Everybody's happy, everybody's friendly, and they all get along, and I have so much respect for D'Addario as a company. They are who make our strings now. They make them custom for us. It's not a D'Addario string, it's a Dingwall string made by D'Addario, but they are just such a high-quality company, and really proud to be working with them. So, as far as I know, the first 37-inch scale B, there was no multi-scale hardware back then, so the first multi-scale hardware. There were no multi-scale pickups. For the longest time, we used Bartolini pickups, and we just had them tweak them for our designs. So they were technically not multi-scale pickups. They were kind of converted into multi-scale pickups. And then we started making our own in about 2000. So first multi-scale strings, first multi-scale hardware pickups, and pretty much the first production multi-scale bass. And so that's been our calling card ever since. We're at about 20,000 now. And so there are 20,000, even though we're a small company, there are a lot of basses. You keep doing something long enough, and eventually you'll get to high numbers. And when we started making pickups, we decided not to go the traditional route. I'm not sure why, because there's nothing wrong with going the traditional route, but we started with neodymium for magnets. And neodymium is an incredibly powerful magnet. Its tone, though, the tone of the magnet isn't really the tone. It's more of the pole pieces that is the tone. And so what we found was it created a really aggressive tone. And that's kind of one of the reasons why our basses are so popular with aggressive music, is because we have these neodymium magnets with aggressive sounding pole pieces, and they really work well with that style of music. But we also offer other pickups that have a more traditional tone and traditional voicing and more bass-heavy voicing. And they use different materials like Alnico and stuff like that. I'm losing my place here, 1 second. Okay, so what's the big deal about multiscale? Why is it important? What I've come to decide is that strings can either be tighter sounding or they can be warmer sounding, and it's kind of a spectrum. And do we have any live sound engineers here? Anybody mix? What's the most difficult frequencies to mix live? Basses, yeah. And every one of you, if you've even heard of our name, if you've just started bass, you don't know who we are. Ding who? But it takes a while for you to get into bass and stick with bass and learn about bass before you even hear of Dingwall. So the fact that you're here tells me that you spent a lot of time playing bass, practicing, honing your skills, getting as good as possible on your instrument before you even heard of us. And so I'm going to assume, and maybe this is correct, maybe not, but I'm going to assume that if you're going to play live, you'd like to be not only heard, but understood as well. Music is a communication. You're communicating to your audience. And how many people have played in front of an audience where they just sat there and stared at you? Or myself included, or worse yet, they didn't even look at you, they were talking to their friends. So that's a one-way conversation. That's you communicating to your audience, but they're not communicating back. Now, how many people have played in front of an audience where their eyes are focused on you? You can feel the energy coming. You can see them moving in time with the music. How did that feel? Exactly. That's a two-way conversation. And so this microphone, it's a communication tool. It's helping me to be able to speak to you. This bass guitar, it's a communication tool. It's helping you to speak to your audience, communicate your musical ideas. And this is just using the words that are coming out of my mouth. But this is doing something completely unique. It's taking the tips of your fingers. You're touching a string, and you're able to communicate an emotion and musical ideas to an entire audience and make them all feel the same thing just with the tips of your fingers. So the better the tool that we can make for you to do that, the better you're able to communicate with your audience, and the better the chance that you're going to get feedback from them and have a two-way conversation. And it doesn't get any better than that. Having the audience feedback to you is just magic. So the longer the scale length of the string, the tighter the tone, the more harmonic content you get. The shorter the string, the warmer it sounds. Now, you can increase the tension of a string by using a larger gauge. The problem with that is that it reduces how high you can play the string. So as you get further and further up the neck, the harmonics start to drift. They start to go all over the place, and you start to sound like a steel drum instead of a bass guitar. So the only way around that is to use a thinner string, but then if you're tuning lower, the thinner string is going to be too loose. So you add that tension back by stretching it. And so the longer, it's not just the scale length, but it's the scale length with a thinner string that allows it to be flexible and allows you to play all the way up the neck. One of the things that we're going to be doing this summer with our 4 strings is we're going to be offering free BEAD tuning and setup and a capo. And so that's going to allow a 4-string player, like, let's face it, not everybody wants to adjust to the 5th string. That's a bit of a hurdle. Some people prefer the feel, the weight of a 4-string. But now, for this summer, for the next 2 months, you'll be able to order the bass with BEAD tuning, so you can access the lower notes of a 5-string. But we're also including a capo that if you put it at the 5th fret, now you have a standard tuned short scale bass that still has all the harmonic content, and you can still play up the neck on all 4 strings and have nice fidelity. And if you want, you can drop it down to a D. It's a really cool system. Not a lot of bass players use capos, but I think there's a lot of potential for just versatility in a bead tuned bass with a capo. Now, if you spend any time on the internet, you're going to run into people that think wood makes no difference in tone on an electric bass, and they're kind of right. But then you're going to have the guys that say, you guys are crazy, wood is everything. I like my rosewood fingerboard and my maple neck and my alder body, and I like that much better than my swamp ash, yada, yada, yada. So show of hands, who thinks wood makes no difference in an electric instrument? Okay. Who thinks wood makes a difference? Okay, we have some yes, some no. The truth is you're both right. So if you're to go to a large concert hall, could you tell the difference between the tone of a rosewood and a maple fingerboard? No way. I couldn't do it either. I could see it. That's how I'd tell. But how many times have you played an instrument, especially live, especially in a big venue, how many times have you played an instrument where it just felt like, man, this thing's fighting me? The harder I play, it seems like the less I get out of the instrument. And how many times have you played an instrument that responded and it's like, holy cow, I'm just barely touching it and the notes are leaping off like that? That's the difference that wood makes. So yes, it affects the tone, but in a very, very subtle way. But what it does is it affects the resonance and how it responds to your touch, and that's where wood, blending the woods really comes into play. So the reason the answer is yes to both cases is because you won't hear the difference in the wood. But what you will hear is you'll hear a better performance if the instrument is responding well to the player. So we both get a prize? All right. Now, we're known for multi-scale, and I can either answer questions on that. If anybody has questions on multi-scale before I go any further, we can do that now, or we can do it later. Anybody got a burning question?
Does Novak still have some money with that system, or?
I'm glad you brought up Novaks, because it was Ralph Novak that invented the modern system, and he championed it, and he introduced it to the world. The patent has since run out, and so he no longer receives licensing fees. But we still honor him. You'll see his name on the back of each one of our bases. And he was unfairly treated, I think, by the guitar building community, because there were fanfrets earlier. But my view is, okay, yeah, there were, but why didn't anybody else, start making them? And he was the one who took the risk and also got a fair amount of negative feedback. Not from me, of course. Ralph's my friend, and I'm forever in his debt for introducing me to the system. As a matter of fact, when I met him in 1992, that's when I was trying to figure out how I could get the piano and the bass to fit together. And so I got talking to him, and we kind of hit it off, like right off the bat. And so our contract was, all right, I'll do the basses, you do the guitars. That was it. And then we just worked it out from there. So he's a really cool guy.
What's the length of the smallest string on the sixth string?
That's a very good question. It's 32 inches. Now, as much of an improvement, and you're more than welcome to play that six tonight, but as much of an improvement as extending the scale of the B string is, shortening the scale of the C string makes just as much improvement, but in the opposite direction. So it warms it up. It makes the string nice and supple, easier to bend, easier to play, and more sounding like a bass instead of a baritone guitar.
What do you think about other companies releasing multi-scale basses? Is it because they're trying to copy you or something, or it's because the patent expired or something? And what do you think about that? How do you stand out compared to these new brands that are trying to get their share or something?
Yeah, so the question is, what do I think about other companies, and probably bigger companies?
What makes you better? Because I'm pretty sure it's better. Well, I know it's better, but I want to hear it from you.
Well, I have my personal feelings on whose is better, but I'll keep those to my personal, because I mean the beauty of guitars is that you can't measure. It's not like a race car where if you win a race, yay, you're the best. With guitars, there is no finish line. And so George Ferlinetto from F-Bass and I, when we're in Asia, we'll share a room together. We're competitors in the marketplace, but we're friends as well. That's something I really like about the guitar business. But to answer your question, so as long as we were the only ones out there, it was pretty lonely. And I remember going to trade shows, and for 4 days straight, all I'd do is explain multi-scale. And so having other companies, larger companies, come in and start doing their own versions, it's kind of helped us. Now, it's also fired us up and made us go, okay, you want to come and play in our space? All right, let's go. So we have all kinds of designs and models that we will be releasing in the future. But in the meantime, every day we go to work and we try and figure out how can we do this better? How can we make our finishes better looking? How can we improve the strings? How can we improve the bridges? The most recent thing for me was redesigning how we lay the carbon fiber structure. And there's a company called Plek. You'll see that often. What it is it's a computerized system for leveling frets. And if you want a perfect fret job, you find a repair shop that has a Plek. And they will scan your instrument. You'll be able to see, like, within 10,000ths of an inch, you'll be able to see how straight your fingerboard is on every single string, and how flat the frets are, and where the bumps are. And so our Japanese distributor has 2 of these machines. They're very expensive. And he sends me data, and then from that data, I can see how the necks move under tension, and I've adjusted the carbon fiber inside the neck to account for that, and it's been extremely useful. We just had one of our instruments plecked down at NAMM last weekend, and it was as close to a pleck job as possible, even though it was hand done. So we've done put a lot of effort into getting the frets as perfect as possible through just really good tooling. How did I get off on that topic? I can't remember.
There was a question, how do you differentiate from competitors?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so we just try and, kind of ignore what everybody else is doing, and just try and be the best at what we do. Some of these bigger companies you can't call up and ask for the owner, but at Dingwall you can call up and ask for me. Is that worth anything? Well, to some people it is. To some people they don't care, but to other people they like having that connection to the person who actually designed it and sweats over it and really cares about the product. So for now, it's been good.
I do care about like what you just said, like you can call and get some kind of good service and stuff.
Yeah, we try our best. We in my living room, there's a violin that was made in the 1700s, and it's been passed down from grandfather to, well, great-great-grandfather to great-grandfather to grandfather to my dad, and now to me. And so this bass, I expect 300 years from now, will still be, somebody will care about it. They'll make music with it, and it will pour music back into the world. And, the world is always trying to tear itself apart. There's always conflict, and I don't like what you said, and I don't like the color of your flag, and this and that. And we're all guilty of that. And so to be able to pour music back into the world like you guys are doing, you're pouring music into the world, it's kind of balancing that out. And it's very interesting. In war-torn areas, one of the first things to lift people's spirits is music, because if you have nothing left, you can still sing. And guitars are small, so oftentimes people are able to provide music and support to the people as they're rebuilding. So music is one of those things that it's woven through our lives. Oftentimes when babies are being born, there's music in the birthing room. When you get married, there's music. When you fall in love, there's one or two songs that's your song, and you remember that for the rest of your life. Even after you die, people celebrate your life with music. So even though it's so hard to get paid for any kind of art, music or art or painting or building guitars, you tend to feel like what I'm doing has no value, but the reality is music it has incredible value. And I'd really like to see the rest of the world, catch on to that and start paying musicians what they're actually worth and what they're contributing. I got off on a tangent there again. Now, so any more questions about multiscale? I'm more than willing to answer any more. I will move on though, because we are more than just a multi-scale company. We try and improve the bass wherever we can. And so one of the places that we try to improve is the pickups. Now, there are so many different styles of pickups, so many different ways of making pickups. We have our way. And to me, the tone of bass that always resonated was the Precision, Fender Precision, and that uses a split coil pickup. And so as much as I like jazzes, and as much as jazzes are popular and single coils are popular, personally, I like the split coil tone, and I like it for a couple of reasons. One, with 2 coils, you can hum cancel, and so you can deal with the noise issue. But a second advantage is that you can wire those pickups either in series or in parallel. And in series, it boosts the output, it boosts the mid-range, and in parallel, it lowers the output and makes it sound more clean and hi-fi by removing some mids. And not all pickups sound good in parallel. Not all pickups sound good in series. It's kind of hard to balance the two. And so what we do is when we're designing a pickup, we try it both ways. And we keep winding and testing the pickup until it sounds just as good in parallel as it does in series. And now you have a pickup that you can use either way and it sounds good. So this bass here, this is one of the options you can get on a Canadian bass. These 3 switches here are series parallel pickups, 1 for each pickup. So this switch is for the bridge pickup, so you can have series, which is bigger humbucker, or you can have more traditional scoop tone. And then this would be the middle pickup, and that's for the neck pickup. So without even touching the pickup rotary selector, you have 6 different tones at your fingertips. When you combine that with the rotary pickup selector, which also combines the output of the switches in series or parallel, it's getting confusing very fast. But you have a wide range of tones available at your fingertips. They're all sort of, there isn't a bad tone in the bunch. They're all just different flavors of good, and it gives you a place to start off with before you even touch the EQ. And one of the reasons for that is, whenever I would record, if I needed a different tone, I'd set down the guitar, pick up the next one. It would be out of tune because it's cold. So you'd have to sit there and tune it up, dial in your tone, and then by that time the inspiration was gone. And so with a system like this, yeah, it's a lot of switches and it's going to take a few minutes to get used to. If you need another tone, bang, it's right there. And you don't let that inspiration get past you. I don't know about you, but there were so many times where I had an inspiring moment and I lost it and it never came back. Wouldn't that be interesting to measure how many, what am I doing wrong here? I can build them, I just can't put them in a stand. Thank you. Wouldn't that be interesting to calculation of how much inspiration has evaporated into the ether that got lost? It'd be incalculable, I bet. Okay, so that's another value of ours. So balance is a value. Balance in terms of weight distribution, but also balance in terms of across the instrument, the strings. I forgot to mention that with multi-scale. If you do it right, and by right, I can only speak from my perspective, and so my perspective right is if you get the spread of the scale right, and then you design strings to work with that, you can get near perfect tone balance across the strings and near perfect tension balance. And so now, you can dig into that B string as hard as you want, and it reacts just like an E string or an A string. You don't have to back off. So the freedom that I think that gives the musician is that now you don't have to worry about adjusting your technique for your instrument. Your instrument is adjusted for you. You play it however you want. I think that's very, very important to remove the restrictions from the player, and that also makes it a better communication tool. And then in terms of tone, well, we have EQ on active basses, and we have EQ on the amp, and then we have EQ on the mixer. That's a lot of EQ. Why do we even need EQ? Well, because each room is different. We need to EQ for that. But think about it. These pickups, once they sense these strings, there's 5 strings, but it's a mono output. So once the strings are in the pickup, that's it. You cannot break them out. You cannot fix this string with EQ without doing something to that string. And because on a traditional parallel fret bass, because if you try and brighten up this string, it's going to make this string sound worse, or if you try and warm up this string, it's going to make this string sound worse. So in my opinion, the best place to EQ the strings is before they ever get to the pickups, and that's where multi-scale comes in. It allows you to pre-EQ the strings, and now, I mean, passive bass doesn't need EQ, at least at this stage. I'm learning. Talked a little about the rotary pickup selector. Would anybody like to dive a little deeper into that, or?
I don't know if it's the right time, but I've seen some people modifying the instrument. It made me have a reaction, I would say, because it seemed to be so well done. But how do you feel? Do you think it's completely crazy to, let's say, take a D-Rock and change the 4-way switch to a 6 to have 2 other options?
I don't think it's crazy. One of the reasons that we only offer the 4, there's a couple of reasons. If you look at the D-Rock, you see 3 knobs, and yet it's a very versatile sounding instrument. And I'm kind of a fan of how Apple does things. Very versatile, but very clean and simple. I haven't always been like that. I built a bass for one of our customers in Greece that had 64 options. And what I found from that was I liked about 4 of them. And 10 of them sounded almost identical. So there's the extreme end of you could have every sound possible, and then you could have one pickup with no controls. So somewhere in the middle, for my thinking, if it's a 4-way, well, a 3-way switch would even be better, but I like the 4-way switch. You're never more than a couple of clicks away, and it's easy to keep track of, and you don't have to think about it. 6 for me, if you're willing, then you just have a few more clicks you got to figure out, and it gives you some options. So I have nothing against the 6-position switch. From a production standpoint, it requires a really tall switch, and we like to use circuit boards. And the circuit boards, we also like to add, there's what's called a terminal block, and it allows you to attach your pickup leads just with a screwdriver. And then, so that would be too tall, or getting close to being too tall for the body. So that's one of the reasons why we don't do it. But yeah, support Mo. Mo's the guy who's been doing most of that stuff. And he's a great guy. He's really smart, great bass player, great designer, and a super, super great tech. Somebody else had a question.
As for the Canadian made, you have these switches to switch between series and parallel on the pickup. In the NGs and combustion, how are the pickup wired before going into the rotary switch?
Now, we keep changing stuff like that. That's probably one thing that our customers are most annoyed with us by, is because we get something set and then we go, we could make it a little better if we just made this change. So currently, the bridge pickup is in series. The middle pickup is in parallel, so that there isn't so much of a jump in volume when you combine the two in series. And then the neck pickup, I can't remember. I believe it is series, but I would have to listen to it again to remember. Now, the beauty of that is we've pre-wired them that way, but it's not that difficult to unwire and change. If you have a good electronics tech, it's easy. If you have a bad one, it becomes a nightmare. So take it to a good tech, and they can easily switch that around for you. Or just buy one of these, and then it's already done. Any other questions on the rotary switch? I'll add one more thing, and kind of the history of the rotary switch. So in my previous life building guitars, I used series parallel on my Stratocaster, and I really liked the versatility. And so, but our first basses used blends, just like everybody else. And And then I thought, well, I'm gonna add a rotary switch. I just want to hear what it sounds like. And I kind of liked the sound and liked the extra option. And so we offered it. And so most of the people wanted a blend because that's what they were used to. And then every now and again would get a rotary switch order. And back then I was the guy who set the basses up. And I started to notice, man, this bass sounds so much better than the other one. Okay. Wonder what that is. Must be the woods. And then it'd be, a couple of weeks later, we'd get another one come by, and man, this bass sounds so much, it sounds like that last one. What's going on here? And I'd go, well, it's got a rotary switch. That one had a rotary switch. Oh, wait a minute. It's not the woods, it's the rotary switch. And so a rotary switch doesn't resist the flow of electricity, but a volume pot, there's a path to ground, so it's called loading. And so it's actually like taking your volume control and just rolling it down a little bit. And if you run it through a blend control, now it's taking your volume control and it's rolling it down even a little bit more. So there's a noticeable difference in output, especially in the high end, if you just have switching as opposed to a blend or a volume setup. So once I figured that out, it was like, okay, now what do I do? I know how to make a bass sound better, but people don't want it because they want blends. And so I just finally started saying, yeah, sorry, we discontinued blends. And it took a couple of years, and people they weren't happy. They wanted their blends, and I'd explain to them why, and they'd say, I don't care, I want my blend. But eventually we got enough out there that people started to go, yeah, this is kind of cool. And the series tone was what really sold it. Now, humans are funny, and is series a better tone? Who knows? It's louder, and so most people equate louder with better. And so I can't tell you if series is better or not, although I do think it is better in terms of like really dense music. It allows you to push through a lot easier. But there's also something to the fact that it's a little louder than parallel, so that automatically makes you think, oh, better. But it is a really useful tone. Don't get me wrong there. A few of the other things that we do differently are fret size. Now, coming from the guitar world, back in the 80s, 80s guitars had the biggest frets possible, so you could get under there and blend. And so I came from the guitar world, and I thought, well, basses are even bigger, so they need the biggest frets possible. And so for the first year, we built basses with like giant frets. And then, exactly, Dunlop 6000s, they're these monsters. And then I met Lee Sklar, and Lee and I just kind of hit it off. And when Lee's at a trade show, he's pretty distinctive. Does everybody know who I'm talking about when I mention Lee? Yeah. He's a pretty easy guy to spot. And so when he walks through a trade show, it's like, hi, Lee, can I get a picture? Sure. Picture and talk a little bit. Hi, Lee, can I get a, he gets about 2 feet at a time. And he's the most gracious guy. I don't know how he does it, but he's always polite to people. Anyway, so I happened to bump into him at a trade show, and we just kind of hit it off. And so he, rather than just the obligatory photo, he actually agreed to come to my booth and try one of the basses. And he got it right away. He could see the value of the bass. So we agreed, and I sent him a bass, and he received it. And this is back when people faxed. Anybody have a fax machine? Anybody not know what a fax machine is? You guys in the back, right? Okay. All right. So back when we were first starting to build basses, we used fax more than we used email. I can't even believe it, but that's the way it was. And so Lee faxed, sent up a fax, and he said, yep, bass arrived, setup's perfect, I'm going to take it to work tomorrow. And so work for me is I go into a basement and I get covered in dust. Work for Lee Sklar is he goes to work for Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys and cuts an album. And so that's the very first thing he did with that bass was take it in and cut an album. And so on Monday he sent another fax and he said, I'm in. Whatever you want, I'm your guy. And so that was the start of a relationship. And he says, oh, but I forgot one thing. Can you make one with smaller frets? Because I use mandolin frets. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to work well. I don't think I'd ever seen mandolin frets at that time. So I ordered some in, and I looked at them, and I went, if this was anybody but Lee Sklar, I would have said, no, you're crazy. But it was Lee Sklar, so I built a bass. And you know when you have those experiences where the memory is like, it just stays with you like it was yesterday. So this is 1995, and it's like yesterday when I played that bass for the first time, and I felt those mandolin frets, and I was like, what is going on here? The neck was exactly the same. The only thing that changed was the frets, and yet it felt half as thick. And when you'd slide up, instead of going clack, 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 it went no, 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 almost like it was auto-tuning. And I was like, this is crazy. I don't want to use mandolin frets. That's too crazy. But what's the next size up? Well, the next size up would be banjo frets. And, you know, banjo frets are also the same size as Martin acoustic guitars. Actually same size, really close to what Fender used back in the 60s. And so that was the compromise I made. That first bass for Lee, we never used large frets again. I threw the frets out.
You mean the same size that Fender used back in the days on basses, like early precisions?
Yeah, they use. I'm not a historian, but I don't think Fender changed the frets for the guitars or the basses. They just frets are frets. Just bring them in. So I actually So company history 1993 January 13th was when the first bass was assembled. Fast forward to 1996, moved shops, and that was a bad idea because that shop burnt down. Nothing to do with us, just the whole building caught fire, wiped everything out. Up until that time, I'd bought in some new old stock 1960s fret wire from Fury Guitar. He wasn't using it anymore, so I had like a lifetime supply of really cool 60s fret wire. That's probably what I miss most from that shop. That and my drum set. Got off on a tangent again. Truss rod. This is getting a little bit on the nerdy side, but how many people have played on an outdoor stage on a semi-cloudy day, and the sun comes out, and all of a sudden you're out of tune, and the cloud comes over, all of a sudden you're out of tune? Have you ever had that experience? It can be a notorious thing with a certain style of truss rod. The reason for that is that when wood heats up, it shrinks. Just like when wood dries, it shrinks. And so when it heats up, all the air inside the wood in the cell structure absorbs the moisture out of the cell walls, wood shrinks. But when metal heats up, it expands. And so if you have a truss rod when you tighten it, it tightens a metal rod against a wooden neck. That's fine as long as the temperature is stable, but as soon as the instrument heats up, the wood shrinks, the metal expands, and your neck does this. And then when it cools down again, your neck does that. And so necks can be not only unstable in terms of humidity, but they can also be unstable in terms of temperature if you use that style of truss rod. So the style of truss rod we use is the same as what Ibanez uses and many other companies, probably Yamaha. The truss rod is independent of the neck, and it sits in a slot. And so the truss rod uses two strips of metal, and it compresses one against the other. And so it's much less affected by temperature changes. And humidity is another thing, a little bit less affected by that. And so we've seen it in our history over and over again where we'll ship a guitar to Greece, a bass guitar to Greece, and it'll be minus 40 in Saskatoon and plus 40 in Athens, and he'll pull it out of the box and go, still in tune. And that's all to do with just that truss rod design. And we got that from Fury Guitar as well. influences, and I'm kind of getting to the point where, we can switch it over to question and answers, but I'll share one more detail with you, and that's our neck shape. And it came from skateboard ramp design. Now, most people, when they look at a skateboard ramp, it's a quarter pipe with a flat bottom, and that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is an article from 1986 in Thrasher magazine. They came up with the ultimate skateboard ramp design, which was what's called a cycloid. And so if you take a wheel and you put a dot on the wheel and you roll it, it's the most efficient elliptical shape known to man. And so that's what we aim for with our neck carves, is the most efficient elliptical shape. So they're not C, they're not D, they're just this elliptical efficient shape. And the idea is to make the most comfortable neck possible, so that no matter how you hold the neck, and if you have to get from this position to this position, it's the most efficient way possible. So if you're wondering why the necks feel like they do, then that is why. And you'll notice a slight difference between the shape of the Canadian-made models versus the Chinese ones. It's the same back shape. The difference is in the fingerboard. And it took a while to figure that out. But you'll notice a significant difference in feel between this base and that base, even though they share the same back of the neck shape and the same thickness and the same width. They will feel a lot slimmer, and that's 100% due to we use a compound radius on the Canadian-made models. Super compound, like 6.5-inch radius here, which is super tight. And it flattens out to about 22 inches at the bridge. So it's like, whoa. And so it gives you two advantages. If at least my piano teacher, taught me to pretend I had oranges in my hands when I played, because that's not hard on your joints, but this is. And so this gives you more strength, and it's better for your finger structure. So the more curved fingerboard here actually helps your fingers to be stronger and not put as much pressure on the joints. But it's better at the bridge if you don't have to play like this. It's better if you can just play in a straight line. So the flatter it is here, the better. The more curved it is here, the better. And also from a pickups perspective, it's difficult to make pickups that sense perfectly on an arc. We do our best to angle the coils, but it's still pretty difficult. And so you get a better, more even output with a flatter radius at the bridge. So I hated compound radiuses for the longest time, and I thought they were a bad idea. I thought they were marketing hype until I figured it out. And then once I realized the theory behind it, it was like, oh, I'm an idiot. And it wasn't marketing hype, I was just dumb. Any questions on anything? I'm more than willing to answer.
Why does an NG have this piece at the back of the head and not the D-Rock?
That's a good question. So why is there a string bar on the NG and not on the D-Rock? And the reason is that there's just a slight bit less string from here to here than on the NG. And we took a risk on the D-Rocks, and we were able to get away with it. To be honest, that's my least favorite part on the instrument. It's there to perform a function, but, I'm speaking to people from Quebec where everything is beautiful. It has function and beauty, right? And so I'm sure we understand each other here. We will eventually add the string bullets. That's a Dingwall design, and we have those made by Graphtech. We're a small company. It takes us a while to implement changes. So that's where we'll go in that direction. And then when possible, in the case of the 4-string, we'll just eliminate it altogether. Yeah.
How did you manage to get rid of it on the Canadian made?
Yeah. So this is where I guess, you asked the question earlier, and I got talking about where the owner of the company, you can still talk to them. As the owner of the company, I can make really financially bad decisions. So that's a 50-cent solution, and it works perfectly. This is a $50 solution, and it does the exact same thing, but it does it without needing that bar. So if you take a close look, the tuners are countersunk into the headstock, and they have custom shorter posts with a custom shape on them, and that allows us to wind the string down all the way down to the to as close to the yeah. And to be honest, I'm more of a fan of the angled headstock, but man, they are so difficult to make. Especially on a multi-scale. Not everybody does this. Not everybody thinks this is important, but to me, it's everything. The angle has to match the angle of the nut, which means it's not like this. It's like that and like that. Which, oh my God. One of the reasons probably there aren't more multi-scale builders is because it makes everything so much harder. Lining up dots, lining up the nut, lining up the bridge, everything gets more complicated. But flat headstocks have their place, and they're much stronger, especially if you have the truss rod adjustment at the body end. It's really hard to break one of these off. Any other questions? Sure.
I have a question about strings.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you'll be offering tuning on a brand new basis. How about selling like different gauges, like for example, 100 E string, then maybe offer 110. So, well, you talk about the B-AD tuning, but I'm into the drop C tuning. So, I had a hard time figuring how to get strings to make it work because 125 seems a bit big for C tuning, but the regular ones that I'm getting from Dingwall are a bit tad too small.
Gotcha.
I'm planning on offering other gauges so we can get rid of Callium and whatever other companies.
I was just about to say Kalium.
Yeah, well, because it takes a long time to get some here, and they're expensive, and there's duties and stuff. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were planning on extending.
We are. So one of the things that was holding us back was our packaging. Because if you're going to sell something, you need a package for it, and the packaging that we have gets printed by the thousands, and so if we're going to do short runs of packaging, price goes up, and if we do short runs of strings, price goes up, and all of a sudden, Kalium seems like not such a bad option anymore. Now, I won't show it on the streaming, but I can show you guys what our new packaging is going to be. I can show you the prototype. I think it's going to be really cool, and it's going to allow us to be modular with our strings and offer much more flexibility. Now, the question is what our minimum orders with D'Addario are going to be. So that would be another problem we'd have to solve. But there seem to be a lot of guys tuned to G, like drop G. That's
Wow. That's a big, it's that extreme, but yeah, I know that some people are doing it.
yeah.
I'm willing to pay, you said that it would be a bit more expensive, but just to walk in here and just get some Dingwall strings with like different gauges, that would be interesting. Like, as I said, just for in between B and regular tuning, standard tuning for drop C, for example.
Okay.
There's that would be interesting, and I was wondering if you were planning on, making different gauges in the future.
For sure, and also offering different types of strings. We, as of last weekend, we've made a connection with another string manufacturer that does hand-bond strings, which allows us the freedom to be able to. freedom to be able to do tweakier stuff. So I'm really excited for the future, and with the new packaging, it just makes everything so much easier. And we're always looking for input. Like, if we hear one guy who, that sounds like my alarm too. If we hear one person wanting one type of string, it's probably not enough to move on it. But once you hear 3 or 4, then you know that there's going to be many more people, and so it's worthwhile pursuing. And drop C is for sure. It's a common tuning.
Yeah, well, most of the people online use Caliums, but yeah, here in Canada they're expensive. They take a long time to get them. Not to say anything wrong about them, but I heard that the service and the delays are a bit not what we're expecting from companies. So
I think
that would be nice to have a solution and just use different tunings.
For sure. We've actually considered being the Kalium distributor for multi-scale for our bases in Canada, so that we could warehouse the strings, and we do warehouse a certain number of strings. So you're welcome to actually call our sales guy and just see if we have the gauges to do the tuning you want, and if we have them in stock, we can sell them to you. They will be Kalium expensive, but at least then the mailing is cheap.
Quality comes at a price, so I'm willing to pay if it's easy and comes fast
And gets you what you need.
sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What can you tell us about the new roasted hash neck?
Oh, I forgot about that.
Stability and
Okay, so the question is roasted ash and stability. So two separate questions.
stability, the sound, the characteristic.
So I first tried a Northern Ash neck in 1996, and I hated it. I used dark grain filler, and that was a bad idea because it made it look like a shovel handle. And the tone was the highs were really damped, so it sounded dull and lifeless. I know other builders have had success with it, but that was my impression. It was just like, ugh. Now, I can't remember why we got onto roasted Northern Ash. I think it was maybe just because we were looking for an alternative to Wenge. The first neck I tried, though, I was blown away. It's like the notes just seem to pop off the fingerboard, just explosive. And it's lighter in weight. It's roughly as stiff as maple, maybe not quite as stiff, but you have a truss rod and carbon fiber, so that's not an issue. This is its natural color, at least from the supplier we get it from. So it comes to us like that. If you wear through the finish, it's not paint. It's still going to look like that. It's a little smoother than Wenge. And it's less fragile than Wenge. Fragile in terms of when you're machining it, we have to be very careful with Wenge as we're routing it, or it could explode right on the machine. So to me, I cautiously say this is the wood of the gods. It's to me, it's like I haven't heard a better sounding wood. Nice and warm in the low mids, but still some sparkle in the highs. And as far as stability goes now, I can't remember the exact data that we collected on. What we do is we take every one of the fingerboards and neck woods that we use, we cut it at a very precise length, and then we put it on our CNC machine and we measure that length within 10,000ths. And then we throw it into a box and we steam it, and we superheat it and steam it until the wood grows as much as possible. Put it back on the machine, measure it. How much did it grow? And it doesn't grow by much. Wood moves more this way than this way, but it still does move this way. And so if you put a piece that moves more than the other in the humidity, it's going to do that. And you're going to have to crank your truss rod. And then it'll dry out, and it'll do that. And you'll have to loosen your truss rod, and it'll be fine. And then it'll rain, and then it'll dry out, So we are as best as possible now trying to match woods so that they're as close as possible, and you can have the most stable neck possible. The only reason that we're showing this is because it passed that test. So it is a very stable wood. It's not perfectly stable. I don't believe there is such a thing as a perfectly stable. I don't care how long you cook it. It's never going to be perfectly stable if you look close enough at it. You had a question.
Yes, it's about the battery plate. It's very easy to change the batteries. I think it's a good idea to put magnet, but I was wondering if it may transfer some magnetism on the pickup.
Yes.
Because it's very near from me.
Yeah, you're right. And that was a consideration. And so the question is, do the magnets affect the pickups? And to the best of my ability to measure, it doesn't. But that was a concern. And the beauty of designing things in CAD, so computer-aided design, is you can build the instrument to be transparent in the drawing, and so you can see just how everything interacts. You can see where all the holes go. It's freakishly easy to have a screw hole and a pickup wire hole intersect each other. You wouldn't believe how often that happens, and then the base is working fine, and then you put a screw in, and all of a sudden, my pickup's not working. What the heck is going on? Oh, these two holes collided. So with CAD, if you're careful and methodical, you can keep that from happening. The other thing about magnetic fields is they don't extend all that far. They drop off really fast. So if we took those neodymium magnets, especially the ones we use in our pickups, and you put one on either side of your hand, they would stick to each other. But as soon as you lifted this one, let's say 1/8 of an inch, this one would fall off. And so there's a fair amount of room between where the pickup is sensing the string and the magnetic battery compartment. And while we're on the topic of that, so for such a simple design, it should have taken no time at all. But it was a full year of working on this. And it started out being about that big, and then the second revision, it got a little smaller, and the third revision a little smaller, and then and it was still square, and it was 12 revisions over an entire year just to get to that point. And we still revise it from time to time, but I've quit keeping track. And since I have the base upside down and backwards, our Japanese distributor wanted to do this with the instrument to reduce the stretch in the first position. So the request was to stretch the horn. And so I spent some time stretching this horn out, and it looked awful. It just looked terrible. So how am I going to, he's our number one customer, how am I going to please him? And then it occurred to me, well, instead of stretching that, why don't we just move this strap pin around to here and see what happens? And so this came first, and that allowed the development of the D-Rock. But just that little bit there is enough to move this over, and it makes it feel much, much easier to reach. And so we don't really have a cool name for this. Sometimes we call it the reach reducing pin. Sometimes we call it the third. We don't really have an official name for it. But for anybody who buys a Canadian base, that's what that's there for. And so if you find yourself playing live and this is a bit of a reach, just unplug, plug it back in there, and make sure you test it that it's not going to fall out. And it'll really make a difference in the feel of the instrument.
This feature is so cool, I would not be surprised to see it happen more after.
MTD are using it now, the magnet.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. I saw one on the internet, and a couple of other builders are putting magnets for the back plate.
Yeah, patenting things is it's very expensive, and all that money has to come from profits. and that means you have to have profits. And so when I came up with that design, I didn't have enough profits to be able to pay for a patent. And now we take it a lot more seriously. We've had to fight some trademark battles, and man, those add up fast. And it's not just in Canada you have to do it. You got to do U.S. and U.K. and Europe and Asia. It's like, holy cow, the bills don't stop coming.
That's why you said the D-Bird for the D-Rock.
Yeah, that was a bit of not trademark. Well, yeah, no, I guess it was trademark. Yeah, so we never intended it to be like a copy. Although, yes, yeah, exactly. And the whole thinking behind that was that there's a cool story behind the T-Bird. Like if you really look at one closely and look how they designed it and made it, man, that's like one of the coolest bases out there. And then it gets even cooler when you start looking at who designed it. It was a guy named Raymond Dietrich, and he was the original head of design for Chrysler back in like the late 20s and 30s. And so once I found that out, it's like, oh, that's so cool. Anyways, so then I got thinking, okay, so this is a base designed by a car guy. What if that car guy was from Lamborghini instead of Chrysler? What would that look like? And so the Lamborghini Huracan was the inspiration for this, with the nice curves and kind of the muscular look. And I went to my lawyer and I said, okay, well, is this going to be a problem? And he said, oh, yeah, don't worry about it. No. And that didn't turn out to be good advice. Now, the benefit was, so we got a cease and desist, and so we had to make some changes. And I have no problem with that. Like, that's just them protecting their IP. I have no issue with that whatsoever. And the side benefit was, there was a customer, I think actually from this area, that had mentioned on the original D-Bird that they wished this was cut out more so they could reach the upper frets. And on the plane ride, when I got the news about the cease and desist, I was about to take a surfing lesson. It completely ruined my surfing lesson. And I thought, oh man, this is terrible. This was our newest design, and it was supposed to be a big part of our future. And I was just like, I quit. And then on the plane ride home, I was like, well, wait a minute. This is such a distinctive feature of Dingwall bases. Why don't I add one of those? Well, and if I'm going to do that, why don't I cut this out a little bit and give it more access? By the time I landed in Saskatoon, I was like, hey, we can do this. Went from I quit to no, we're not going to quit. We're going to make things better. I agree. Some people don't, but I think the majority of people think this looks better. And the thing I like about it is it's more hours and less. Yeah. And it's, like back to the first song you wrote, it's going to echo what you've listened to. And so that design echoes what we've seen.
Any active version?
Yes. The Hellboy. And so what we did was we worked with Rob Vanderlo, who also, him and his tech came up with the D-Rock version of the switch. So it's different than the other versions we use. It allows you to have, you lose the outside pickups together, but you gain all three. Big tone, cuts through Marshalls. If you've heard of Rob Vanderlo, he plays with a band called Epica. And Epica is, the kick drums are like this all night long. So there's not much room for bass in that. And so he designed a tone that just cuts through the kick drum and the two Marshalls on either side and just cuts right through. So he came to us and he wanted to do an onboard distortion. And so we worked with Darkglass and developed an onboard distortion just for the Hellboy model, but those are sold out. So we'll eventually do a Rob Vanderlo model with that circuit in it. It's kind of cool. So we took what would normally be a dark glass pedal with like 6 controls on it, and we reduced it down to 2 controls. You have a tone for the drive, and then you have a drive level. That's it. And it's amazing how many different varieties of just a little bit of, like, you're playing through an Ampeg, so a nice vintage kind of tube overdrive, to kind of the more modern buzzsaw tone, and everything in between just with 2 knobs. It's really versatile. And 2019, I did a clinic with Rob over in Germany, and he did something I've never seen done before, and it made me appreciate distortion in a new way. Because, I'm kind of old school, distortions for guitars, it's not for basses, but here's what happened. So Rob had some backing tracks, and he preset his bass, and he had it in passive, and he was playing clean, and it sounded like a guy playing a bass, 2 backing tracks. And then he kicked in the distortion, and it just went into the mix, and it sounded like a complete mix. It didn't sound like a guy playing with a mix. It sounded like a complete mix. I couldn't believe how the distortion just allowed it to blend into the backing tracks. It was pretty amazing. So anyways, long story short, that will be the active D-Rock. We are working with another electronics company. I can't say anything about it right now, but it's like, so exciting, at least for me. And that might open up some possibilities. It's kind of a tight area there, so it's hard to squeeze everything in, but I'm sure somebody could shoehorn something in. I'm looking for something now. I'm not just playing with my phone. And this is something nobody's seen outside of the shop. And it's kind of the evolution of that dark glass circuit. So we will do a limited run of Dingwall pedals in gold with black, and it'll be that circuit. So anybody, you don't have to buy the bass to get the circuit. You'll be able to have it for yourself and get those nice vintagey tones. Any other questions? How are we doing for time? I think we're still good. Let her rip.
You have a new model on the way, or something new?
Any secrets?
Yes, cool.
We're bringing Super Gs or Ps to production or anything like that?
Okay, so I will hint at what we're doing. One of the things that I used to do, and when we were smaller, it was kind of cool. You'd release a little bit about what you're working on, and then people would offer input, and then that would help in the development process. But it also showed your competition what you're working on, and it also sometimes built up expectations, and then projects get delayed and that kind of thing, and then everybody's upset. So I will hint that there's a reason the NG2, well, that's an NG3, but the original NG2, there's a reason it was called the NG2 and not the NG1. And that's because I wanted to leave room for an NG1. So without saying too much, that was the thinking all along. And so because the combustion and the NG the NG is based on the combustion, that also leaves room for a C1. Super Ps are very popular, and believe it or not, you're not the first one to ask about a Super P. So, there could be a Super P1 at some point in the future. We're also, the very next model we're going to release is an artist model, and so we're working with this electronics company and this artist, and there's a really cool connection between the two. Just like there was with Nolly and Dark Glass. Nolly and Dark Glass, they were kind of a team, and when we joined forces, it was like this 3-person team. It's similar to the next model we're going to be releasing, and so we should have a prototype in the artist's hands in the 1st of July, and that's probably when photos will start happening. But until then, I can't really say anything more than that. But probably one of the more exciting basses we've worked on in the last little while. And, you know, there's headless hardware in the design board. At the speed I'm going on it, though, I think the headless phase will be over by the time I get the prototypes made. But the idea is toolless. You don't need tools for your headless. That to me was, if you're going to do something useful. That was the whole thinking behind the tone capsule was, as we're sitting there in Denny's in Anaheim, California, with Doug Castro and Adam, we were talking about a 3-band EQ, and I was like, man, there's a million 3-band EQs out there, and there's only so many frequencies you can play with. We've got to do something different. Otherwise, what's the point? And so out of those conversations came the idea of, well, wait a minute, it's a bass. We don't need a treble control. So that leaves room for high, mid, low, mid. And that's where that all came from. The preamp used in the heaviest music known to man was conceived of in Disneyland, basically. I always thought that was kind of ironic. Any other questions? I think we got it. Well, we have an amp here. We have basses here. I'm sure it would be fine to plug in and let you guys try stuff out.
Of course.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much. Really loved being in this area. And like I say, I'd absolutely love to move here. I have roots in the West, but my eyes are open to the beauty of the East. So thank you so much. And Felipe, my social media manager, said, Sheldon, be sure and get a picture. So would you mind if it won't be a selfie, it'll be an ussie. Thanks, everybody.